Hey, Safe Harbor, I hope you're doing well. Wanted to take just a moment to help us go back to what we heard this past Sunday from Pastor Chad from 1 Peter 3 and 4 about how we're called to live as Christians as we are continuing to work our way through the book of 1 Peter. And so Sunday, Chad looked at the fact that just like what happened to Jesus, who was dead and buried and resurrected, we as Christians are called to live out that same reality in our lives as Christians. We also die to who we once were when we follow Jesus. We are buried with Christ to that way of life, and we are raised to live a new life for God. And so I want to mention a couple verses and talk about them just briefly. Verse 18 of chapter 3, it says, "For Christ also suffered for sins once for all, the righteous for the unrighteous, that he might bring you to God." And so that idea that Christ died to bring you to God is a huge thing, because now that gives purpose for how we're called to live. We're called to live with God, and we're called to live mindful of God, seeking God, knowing God. And so that's a huge reality that Jesus died for that purpose. And so to not live for God would be to minimize what Jesus has done, to not live knowing God and walking through life with God and being intentional to try to do that in bigger and better ways as we go on through the Christian life would be minimizing what Jesus has done. And then kind of going to the implications of that in chapter 4, Peter says, "In order to live the remaining time in the flesh, no longer for human desires, but for God's will." And so Jesus brings us to God so that we don't keep living for human desires, that we live for something bigger. We live for God's will in our life. And so this is really a challenge. Let me challenge you all. What in your life right now are you living for? Do you feel like the things you're spending your time and your energy, your thought life, your words on, are they for human desires, or are they actually for God's will? Are they accomplishing God working in this world and you representing Christ in your life to people around you and speaking on behalf of the truth of God to people around you so that they may come to know him and follow him? Or are you trying to in some way appease your own comfort or appease what you want to make yourself feel better about your situation? And so let's just take some time this week to think through the reality that first Jesus died to bring us to God, so that we would then live with God, changing our desires and making us want to live for his will and not for the things here around us in this world. And so what a blessing it is to know that Jesus has done that for us and that God has these great purposes for our life. My prayer for myself and for you is that we would experience that. We would experience the joy and the blessing of living for God's will right here and right now. Take care. Look forward to seeing you soon.